And I have to say, like, as much as I'm a cheerleader for law firms, I really can't point to a lot of law firms that are, during this crisis, fundamentally changing their business. I think you've said this is the kind of time where you see 10 years of change in 5 weeks, right?
Yeah.
I may have the number of weeks wrong. But in many industries, you see like this radical acceleration of the pace of change as a necessity. You have to, right? But I don't see it in law firms. I don't see it at all.
I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today, we welcome Ed Walters as part of our Legal Tech Leaders series on Daily Matters. Ed is the CEO of Fastcase, the online legal research software company, and he is also an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University Law Center. Ed, it's so great to have you here.
Great to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So Ed, first of all, what's on your mind most right now?
There's two big things that are really kind of front and center for me. The first thing I'm thinking about a lot is when to go back to the office. And I think, in this sense, Fastcase is probably not unlike a lot of law firms in the sense that I don't think we quite know what the right answer is just yet. In fact, I don't even think we have the right frame yet for answering the question. So I read a lot about this, and I have to say, I just don't really have like a satisfactory expert to turn to who says, here is when you know when to bring people back to the office. I keep getting these like promotional things for plastic barriers between people who are working next to each other, or the idea that we're going to stagger when the teams come in. And I just have to say, like, none of that seems very persuasive or satisfactory to me. It all seems
and for you, that decision, does that orbit around when is it safe from a health perspective to start returning to work?
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% what it's about. So I think, like the Clio team, the Fastcase team has worked pretty effectively from home. For people who use Fastcase, the experience is no different whether we're in the office or out of the office. We're answering the customer service calls, the reference attorneys are all remote. And so the experience for our users is roughly the same. And I think, again, like I think the Fastcase team and the Clio team are very simpatico about this. If it's not interrupting the users, if the users have the same experience, we're not rushing back to the office. If users were saying, I can't get the same service from Fastcase, we'd feel differently about it.
Yeah, we've found much the same thing where, in fact, in many ways, I think delivering support and delivering product innovation better than we did pre-COVID-19. So I'm wondering, has the other half of that thought transpired as well, where you're wondering, do we ever return to the office as normal? And is there a kind of enduring change to the way that Fastcase works and maybe thinks about work from home starting to happen?
Well, the only thing I'll say is that we all really like each other's company. And so I think that our team really misses being in the office together.
Right.
There is a lot of kind of spontaneous brainstorming that happens in the office, and things can happen a lot faster when you're doing things like product design, for example, when you're all in the office together. So there are things that happen faster and better and more efficiently in the office together. So I think, this is just thumbnail from the end of May 2020. My guess is that we will come back to the office. But I think it's probably going to be targeted more around a vaccine that we know is effective, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be the kind of situation where we're taking everyone's temperature when they come in the morning and taking that as some sort of a proxy of, whether they are safe to come to work. I mean, I think we all know now COVID-19 has a lot of people who are asymptomatic but contagious. And so I can't imagine like little plastic barriers or, taking temperature being enough. We may do those things, right? but I think it's going to end up being the presence of a vaccine as the kind of frame that allows us to answer that question. But it's an evolving point of view, because I don't think we yet have good guidance from CDC or World Health experts to give us good knowledge of when to come back.
I will definitely check in on that. I think it's interesting to note, where one of the things I love about this podcast is it's a bit of a time capsule where we'll be able to look back and see how did we feel in late May 2020 and when did we think we'd be returning to normal. And I will certainly check in with you on that in the future. As a sidebar,
I'm curious. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna ask the same question of you, but your sidebar first.
Well, my sidebar first, and then I'll answer the question. I found myself wondering on the weekend, how does one buy stock in plexiglass companies? Because that is one industry that is certainly booming. And like you, Ed, I've got a bit of an evolving perspective on how things will look on the other side of this. We've seen a lot of Silicon Valley companies, I think, almost in a PR war around who can embrace work from home more fulsomely. So we saw Facebook and Google first say they're going to continue working from home for the rest of 2020. We saw Twitter last week or the week before actually say we're never going to return to work. We're never going to require work from home employees to come into the office if they don't want to forever. And then, just last week we saw Shopify, which is Canada's largest technology company, say that they're going distributed by default was the phrase they used. So the idea that your in-person meetings, your product design sprints, everyone will be a tile on a screen, and they may happen to share physical space when they're doing that, but they'll be a tile on the screen. And my perspective on this is, I think, number one, a lot of organizations are overestimating their ability to work fully distributed and fully remote because they are drafting off of the momentum they built up pre-COVID-19. And even 2.5 months into work from home for Clio, we're still benefiting from all the trust and the relationships and the collaboration and even the product roadmap, for example, that we had built out pre-COVID-19. We're benefiting from the leaders that we groomed and developed over the course of the last over the pre-COVID-19 era, and benefiting from their leadership over the course of the last 2.5 months. So for me, what's an unanswered question is, where does that momentum start to taper off? And when do we start to feel the pain of work from home and distributed work? In a lot of ways, as I said earlier, we're working better. Employees are more satisfied and more happy. We're shipping more product. We're seeing actually record revenue performance. We're seeing all-time high net promoter score from our customers. We're seeing record level CSAT, customer satisfaction on our support front lines. So a lot of good stories. And I think it'd be easy to extrapolate from the last 2.5 months and say, let's do this forever. But I do think that's a dangerous data point to extrapolate from, because essentially it's just one data point. It's the last 2.5 months that in the grand scheme of things is a relative blink of the eye. So for me, I'm wondering, how do we best achieve a hybrid of the two models and embrace the best parts of work from home? I do think Clio will end up being more distributed and more work from home. But like you, I really prize and value the in-person interactions that you just can't replace with a Zoom meeting. And it's a product designer and a product manager and a group of engineers getting in front of a whiteboard and designing something new. And I've just never seen that happen as effectively as in person. So I saw a tweet a couple of weeks ago that I think captured it pretty well, which was, on-sites will be the new off-sites. This idea that you'll go to the office probably with a very deliberate task in mind. We're going to go into a space and achieve something, and then we're going to go back home and work on executing on that. And I think for highly creative, highly innovative moments in any business, whether that's a law firm or a technology company, I think we'll see the need for those in-person gatherings, but a more permanent shift for when you're in heads down execution mode. Why not do that from home if you've got a home environment that's set up? The other, and by the way, I'm conscious this is your interview, and I've spoken more than
No,
you
I
so
asked
far,
you
so
the question.
I'm gonna flip this quickly. But the other thing we've seen is there's really two ends of the spectrum in terms of how people are thinking about work from home. We've got people that have said, I love work from home and I never want to go back to the old way. And we've got people on the opposite end of the spectrum saying, I'm desperate to get back to the office. I've got kids climbing all over me. I've got a 400 square foot apartment in downtown Vancouver that I'm trying to work out of with my partner and my kids, and it's just untenable, and they're desperate to get back to an office environment. So I think accommodating those two ends of the spectrum and everyone in between that maybe wants a bit of an in-between world is what we're going to try to achieve. And I think about that as kind of a hybrid model, and how do we become world-class at that hybrid model. And I want to maybe pivot this conversation to your perspective, Ed, on the law firms that you see adapting to this new reality. We've seen technology companies like Fastcase, like Clio respond in a certain way. What's your perspective on what's happening in the legal industry at a macro level? And are you seeing the crisis have the kind of catalyzing effect you might hope?
Yeah, well, so at the very high level, I'll say, we have definitely seen and can validate the information in the Clio Legal Trends report, which is that matters are really trailing off for the month of April. And so we've seen kind of legal activity in terms of the outputs, right? So the number of complaints that we'll see in docket alarm, the number of filings and pleadings before courts, the number of decisions in the Fastcase Legal Research Service, the number of bankruptcy filings in Next Chapter. Tracking these things in the macro, there was a little bump in March, I think, where people said, oh crap, we're probably going to be at home for a long time. I need to finish these couple of things before I leave my physical office. And then the long trail off, right, where things declined to a very large level in April. And, I've seen some of the data from the Legal Trends report as well. So I know you're seeing the same thing at Clio. We know it's going to pick back up, but we don't know when.
And maybe just to underscore those data points from the Clio side,
please.
We saw over the course of February to April, close to a 40% drop in new matter creation. So obviously that's one of the biggest leading indicators we can look for in terms of what is downstream revenue impact of COVID-19 going to be. And we'll be publishing this state of the industry type report monthly. So we published our first report on May 4th. And on mid-June, we will publish our updated June data. And I think it'd be very interesting to see if we're starting to see the early glimmers of a recovery of some sort. I'm curious, you've got a real interesting constellation of data from the Fastcase perspective. And Fastcase is, of course, involved in more than just legal research. Maybe we can talk first for a second, Ed, about, what is Fastcase, if there's any listeners, and it's hard to imagine anyone that hasn't heard of Fastcase, but if they haven't heard of Fastcase, what is Fastcase? But also what are the constellation of businesses that Fastcase owns? And you've really become, a bit of an empire over the last few years with a lot of different businesses related to that core research product. And then what data points do those products give you in terms of these macro level trends in the industry? You touched on a couple, but I'd love to explore that a bit more in depth.
Yeah, well, I think of Fastcase as kind of a legal information company. So we started as a legal research service, capturing all of the judicial opinions, statutes, regulations, court rules, constitutions that make sort of primary law. Traditionally in the US only, although we would love to look to expand into other countries as well. We have expanded that into like kind of secondary materials, treatises, books, and legal news with our acquisition of Law Street Media. And then docket information and docket analytics, all of the things that are filed in courts that lead up to those opinions, the complaints and the answers, the briefs, pleadings, and motions in state and federal courts, and then the analytics around them. What's the seasonality of litigation against Walmart? What law firm is more effective for a certain kind of cause of action in front of which judge? What arguments are likely to be well received or to win in certain courts? What's the exposure of a certain kind of a lawsuit in a certain place? And then finally, forms and workflow in Next Chapter. Next Chapter has traditionally been kind of like TurboTax for bankruptcy petitions. A lawyer and a paralegal would sit down with a client and go through an interview, and the Next Chapter software, which is all cloud-based, will allow the lawyer and the law firm and the paralegal from anywhere in the world to prepare a petition that's custom made for each of the 92 different bankruptcy courts in the country, each of which helpfully has its own archaic sets of forms for bankruptcy.
Right.
So Next Chapter has traditionally been bankruptcy. We're now moving into other areas like immigration or trusts and estates that will be very form heavy, and create workflow tools that allow lawyers to practice these areas effortlessly and errorlessly. So even if you're not like a bankruptcy lawyer, but you have a family law client who needs to file a bankruptcy, Next Chapter can help law firms add that to their practice. But I think if you look at this kind of holistically, it is really a company that helps collect legal information and legal data for effective practice and decision making and work product. So if you looked at like maybe the stock market in the 1970s, you might get a good like stock tip, that would make you invest in a company or something.
Right.
And software ate that. Software destroyed the hunch-based anecdotal investment philosophy. And so what Fastcase is doing right now is the same thing in law. All of the decisions we've made in the past based on hunches or feeling like you know a judge because you gave to her campaign or you play golf with her or something, now people will make those decisions with legal information and legal data. And whereas it used to be kind of a single point solution for legal research, now there's a lot of kind of data sources that are combining with each other and providing a 360-degree view of that kind of decision-making climate for the practice of law.
And Ed, I want to point out that you're the editor of a book called Data-Driven Law, Data Analytics and the New Legal Services. So a must read for anyone that's interested in deep diving on this topic. But as you pointed out, there's an opportunity for Moneyball style analytics in legal, and to do away with hunches, to do away with gut instinct, and talk about how you can actually leverage data to make decisions and take away all the subjectivity and errors that often come along with trusting our judgment or trusting our gut. Can you talk about a few places that data can be leveraged in the practice of law that maybe are not front of mind or maybe not obvious to most lawyers?
Yeah, so maybe just two. So in addition to working with lawyers who subscribe to Fastcase, Fastcase is a business and we use law firms. And often when we start some sort of a legal matter where Fastcase is the client, we will say to our law firm, how much is this likely to cost? And law firms will say something like, it's going to cost you $650 times however many hours it takes us to finish the work. And for me as a client, I will say, look, I've done 0 of these. This is going to be the first time I've done a complaint in this court or this kind of tax filing, right? You've done hundreds or thousands of them. You are in the best position to know what this is going to cost. You've got all of the data. There's an information asymmetry. So share it back with me. I don't need perfect data. I don't need you to say, this is even like a fixed fee, although I would love a fixed fee. Tell me what it's cost in the past. Give me the bell curve. Tell me what characterizes the matters that cost the most. Because in a business, I need to make like those cost benefit decisions, right? Do I want to pursue this litigation or not? Is it worthwhile to file in this particular way in tax? Is it going to save us enough money considering the legal fees, or is the juice not worth the squeeze? We want to acquire a small company. Does it even make sense to use a law firm in that case, or should we just go it alone? And so in the past, like I'd say, clients make these decisions based on guesswork.
Yeah.
There's no data that they can use to say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. Should we oppose this motion and spend the money, recognizing that it is highly unlikely to succeed, right? Should we settle this case today instead of litigating it because we know that our chances of winning are 9%, right? So I would just say from a client's perspective, law feels very foreign and very risky, in part because of that information asymmetry. And Jack, you and I have talked about this a little bit before. The kind of now famous American Bar Foundation survey that says that 20% of people who need legal help in the US, and that a number that's kind of mirrored in Canada and worldwide, are doing that through the legal services market. 80% of people who have problems are not.
Right.
And many lawyers and law firms approach this as if it is a problem exogenous to them. Legal services are expensive, and that's a fact of life. That is a fixed part of the world. And people don't have enough money, especially in the people law sector, but also in the corporate law sector, to pay for these very expensive products. And that's too bad. Poverty, they might say, like creates an access to justice crisis. And
somebody else needs to solve that problem.
Yes, if we could just solve poverty, then people could afford my expensive legal services when they appear in court. And the fact that no one can possibly understand how much this legal service is going to cost is just an unfortunate byproduct of what legal services are. And so, as you have said in the client-centered law firm, and in many of your speeches, that's not how markets work. That is like the quote in the frame behind the desk of the CEO of Netflix and Uber, right? That is the rationale for the disruptor. If you want to find a market to disrupt, find a market that says something like that. The customer's problems are their own problems and not ours. The features of this market are fixed forever, and there's nothing we can do about it. But we'll just expect customers to rewind the cassette and drive back to our bricks and mortar store to return that one cassette and then look to see if we have that other cassette that they want in stock.
Right.
So time and again, law firms can't really or haven't really met clients where they live, where they want to live. And this is kind of a good news, bad news thing, right? If you're an innovative law firm, it's a great news thing because everything that you do to delight customers, to create an effortless experience for them, to quote you, Jack, means more business for you. Means that you can reach
that 80% of the market is up for grabs.
That latent market is all upside, right? And I've heard you say this a number of times before, but I will maybe parrot it back to you. The last survey I saw of this legal services market, Thomson Reuters Legal Executive Institute, the size of the legal services market in the US, about $437 billion. That's just 20%.
Right.
Right? So the latent market is probably easily as big. The size of the legal services market in the US alone is probably closer to $1 trillion. And as you say in your book, if you look at the size of the market for Netflix today, it is far in excess of the entire market for Blockbuster and all of the video rental services. I can't even think what they were anymore.
Right. Blockbuster and its ilk never had businesses that were the scale of Netflix, even at their peak.
Right. And so it's not like Netflix just displaced the Blockbuster market. Netflix created a market that engulfed the Blockbuster market. And so the good news is for innovative legal services providers, for entrepreneurial lawyers, I would say probably, the cohort that's using Clio and Fastcase right now, there is so much upside. There is such a great opportunity, maybe not to be like a global Netflix, but to be the Netflix of family law lawyers in your community, to be the Netflix of corporate formation or corporate bankruptcy in your market. You might be able to reach people that traditional law firms were never able to. So that's the good news part of it. The bad news part of it is nobody's doing it, or very, very few law firms are changing their business models, even now, right?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So the COVID-19, we've talked about in so many industries, it's been this kind of accelerant of change that was already underway. And if you let's look at retail as an example. There was a shift away from bricks and mortar retail, a shift toward e-commerce, a shift toward online purchasing. And there was some data published just a couple of weeks ago that talked about the adoption rate of online shopping, e-commerce. And it just looked like a vertical line around mid-March where adoption just tripled and grew more in the course of 2 months than it did in the previous 10 years. So we're seeing some spaces like retail get transformed and see this trend that I think most of us saw was well underway. We saw physical malls starting to fade into obscurity. And we saw companies like Shopify, emerge as very strong leaders. Amazon is busier than they've ever been. Do we see a similar trend in legal? Are you seeing the same kind of accelerating impact on legal in the way that you might expect?
In short, no. And I would love to, right? So I am definitely not a doomsayer. I'm not like a pontificator or a futurist or anything. I am rooting for law firms. I'm rooting for the law firm, business model and for helping clients. And I'm rooting for the legal services market. And I've said for a couple of years, there is a window here for us to kind of reinvent legal services and to tap that latent market and to, really have law firms do better work and more interesting work, less drudgery, and to really scale the impact of their help. And I have to say, as much as I'm a cheerleader for law firms, I really can't point to a lot of law firms that are, during this crisis, fundamentally changing their business. I think you've said this is the kind of time where you see 10 years of change in 5 weeks, right?
Yeah.
I may have the number of weeks wrong. But in many industries, you see this radical acceleration of the pace of change as a necessity. You have to, right? But I don't see it in law firms. I don't see it at all. Or at least, in very, very small instances where law firms are changing their businesses to meet this new reality. Maybe the brightest part I've seen for this was about a week and a half ago. The Next Chapter team threw a kind of virtual bankruptcy week summit. Jack,
that was fantastic.
You were the closing keynote.
I was part of it, and it was a great event, and the first great virtual event I've been part of, which was really exciting.
Yeah, I think the Next Chapter team did a terrific job of throwing that. And the thing that really stuck out for me was that it was thousands of law firms, more than 3,200 lawyers and law firms who signed up for this conference to do something different. What they wanted to do was to add bankruptcy as a practice area for their small firm. Traditionally, people who have not practiced bankruptcy, but who recognize they're going to have restaurant clients or retail clients or family clients who need to reorganize their debts. And they're saying, in order to serve those clients, in order to be successful in my law firm as a business, I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to do something different that is very client-centered, very client-focused to help my clients navigate this new time. And man, just everything in my experience with customer service, with practicing law, has taught me that when you help people in their biggest times of need, you have a friend and a customer for life. When people's backs are really against the wall and you are able to help them, they're going to bring everything to you. So I'm very encouraged to see law firms who are trying to at least add practice areas, who are trying to innovate in their law firms. Obviously, adding bankruptcy is not the only way that you could or should do that. But if we could take this time, the spring and summer of 2020, and finally move a lot of law firm practices that are stuck in stupid, insecure, expensive on-premises systems, and move those practices to the cloud. Take book products that are sitting in binders behind the desk and move those online. Take a workforce that is very concentrated on hourly one-on-one engagements and build them out into scalable, distributed enterprises. And again, you don't have to be 1,000 people. You could be, a lawyer, a paralegal, and a legal secretary, but to work in a distributed way and to create products that clients can use at scale. Man, if we could sort of see in the legal industry that kind of evolution, a decade's worth of evolution, in this spring and summer, it's an amazing opportunity for law firms. Barring that, I don't know what our profession expects clients to do. The clients aren't going to do gymnastics to come to us. They're going to go find someone else to provide the service, or they're going to cook it themselves.
And one of the comments you made in our preamble before starting recording this show, Ed, was a comment to the effect of, if it's not COVID-19 that catalyzes this change that legal needs to undertake, what will it take? It's hard to imagine a world event that is fundamentally transforming how so many industries are operating, and accelerated change that's underway. If we're not able to lean into this opportunity, if we want to look at the silver lining that is COVID-19, it's an opportunity to experiment. We have permission to experiment from our clients and from the world. This is no better opportunity will surface in our lifetimes to rethink how we deliver legal services.
Beautifully said. I think the question is this the beginning of this process or the end of this process? It really could be the beginning of a period of great experimentation, of law firms creating new products to serve clients better in a very client-centered way, or it could be the end. If we're not able to experiment now, when everyone is working from home, when clients aren't leaving their homes, where we're going to need to try new things in order to reach those clients, then when? If COVID-19 isn't the catalyst to create that change might never happen for the legal services market.
So Ed, I'm curious what you've got a really broad perspective on what's going on in legal and legal technology. So in addition to running Fastcase, which I would venture to say is probably one of the most widely used pieces of legal technology on the planet, with most American lawyers having access to it from their bar associations. You also teach at Georgetown, teaching a class about the law of robots. You're an expert in everything from cloud-based software to artificial intelligence and machine learning. You're really a bit of a renaissance man, I think, in legal, and you touch on a lot of different areas of technology and have a very broad vantage point in terms of what's going on in the industry. When you take all of these areas of expertise, where you see the trends that are underway on the technology side, and you couple that with what you know about the legal market and the perspective you have, what do you believe if we execute against the opportunity that's out there, if we kind of look at the positive outcome side of things, how do lawyers best embrace the technologies that are beginning to emerge or already well established that can help them in delivering legal services? And how do they shift their thinking into what I sometimes describe as a bit of a growth mindset, as opposed to a fixed mindset and a very precedent-driven mindset, which is unsurprisingly the dominant one for many lawyers? Give me, on one hand, I guess, some predictions. I'd love to hear some big Ed Walters style thoughts about what the future holds for legal, and what you think the opportunities for lawyers are in terms of shifting their thinking in a way that maybe better prepares them for the realities ahead.
Yeah, well, no pressure, right?
No pressure.
Especially I'm doing this the week after you have Richard Susskind on. So as I said, I'm really not like a futurist of any kind, but I am very curious. And one thing that really strikes me right now is not the future for artificial intelligence, but the future for emotional intelligence. AI has proven, AI and software generally has proven very good at replicating the dullest, dirtiest, most dangerous tasks. If you look at just electronic discovery in the legal services market, that was something that nobody ever wanted to do in my law firm. And today, lawyers, for the most part, don't do discovery in the way they did 20 years ago. And that wasn't a hard transition. People say that lawyers are Luddites or technophobes or whatever, and I frankly don't buy that. If you look at the way law firms moved to use Zoom in the last 6 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, Zoom video conferencing software was not very widely used in law firms. And then suddenly, like, everyone on the planet was using it like 2 weeks later, right? And Zoom is not the easiest thing in the world. Like, it will disconnect your headphones, or you can mute yourself accidentally or whatever. But even Supreme Court justices have sort of figured out how to use video conferencing tech. And lawyers and law firms, really around the world in a very short amount of time, figured out how to use this technology, and it wasn't a big deal. And so I think that the kind of software part of this will blend to the background. It won't be a thing to have Clio in the cloud, or Next Chapter in the cloud, or to use a book or a form that you used to use in a binder in Fastcase or in Docket Alarm or something else. The software will kind of disappear into the background. And I'm very optimistic about the ability of lawyers to use software, at least well-designed software, right? Software that kind of gets out of its way will get out of the way. The real question for me is, how do the humans respond? How do human law firms and business development leaders change the business to find new clients? Now that they can't go have lunch at the City Club with them, or go play golf with them, or meet at the Rotary Club, all of these kinds of things we've done in the past to build business, how do we find new ways to relate to clients and maybe understand them better, to get more into their space, to understand their circumstances better than we have in the past? And I think it's going to be that emotional intelligence that comes from this period, from understanding our clients as people, from them knowing us and our firms as people, those human relationships that are going to be the enduring thing from this time. The things that we're going to remember the most are not going to be whether we're using Google Hangouts or Zoom. It's going to be that time where the client called in tears and said, "I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do," and a lawyer, a trusted advisor, sits next to them and says, "Your problems are my problems. You're going through the worst day of your life, and you don't have to face this alone. I've seen worse. Here's what's going to happen next. Here's how we're going to face this, shoulder to shoulder, maybe virtually shoulder to shoulder, but together," right? And I think when people look back on this time, it is really going to be these extraordinary human connections that are made possible by this crisis that's really going to be the most memorable part, both for lawyers and for clients.
I think it's a really profound observation, Ed, and I love your frame around this. I do believe technology, when it's doing its job, fades into the background, and this focus on emotional intelligence, I think, is so important for all the lawyers out there worried that the robots are coming to take our jobs. It's the one place that we, at least for the time being, have a unique advantage over the machines. And I think it's actually a highly underdeveloped skill in most lawyers as well, and it's one of the concepts I talk about in my book. This idea of empathy, which is not a unique or new idea, but the enormous amount of power it gives the relationship that you have with a client if you're able to build true empathy for them, to leverage, as you pointed out earlier, this information asymmetry to help your client, to put their mind at ease, say, I've navigated, let's use the bankruptcy example, I've navigated 200 of these. I know what lies ahead. I can give you the comfort that there's an other side to this process, that you're going to come out stronger and you're going to come out better positioned for a bright future. And I know how to get you there. That emotional connection is so powerful. And I've heard a number of clients, even over the last few months, as we've truly entered this pandemic, comment on the fact that they're seeing a human side to their lawyers in this pandemic, even their big firm lawyers that are maybe working from home, that they really appreciate. Like, there's a hunger. We often talk about this asymmetry between what lawyers' expectations of what clients want are and what those clients actually want are. And it's one of the things we've explored a lot in the Legal Trends Report at Clio, and it's something I know you've thought about a lot as well. Ed, you really, I think, see a hunger and a need for this human connection, especially in a time like this. But I think that actually spans beyond this crisis, and people seeing the human side of lawyers, people seeing them operate at home, people seeing their kids wander into the Zoom frame.
Exactly right.
They actually really prize that and value it. And I think that's been an interesting trend for me to see. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with your comment about emotional intelligence.
Yeah, just to emphasize what you're saying here, most law firm lawyers, like, want to keep the dog out of the frame because they feel like it makes them look unprofessional, right? But for clients, when the dog comes in, it is the highlight of the call, right? You think about these business meetings or whatever, like when the kid comes stomping through with the electric guitar in the background, that is like the best part of the call. You really understand somebody better when their cat like comes walking across the screen in the middle of the call. And for a client and for many people, that is like the highlight. That is the most memorable thing. It's why the expert from CNN, I can't remember what it was South Korea, where the kid comes like
that's right
through the room in the background.
That went viral last year?
Yes,
that was 2 years ago.
It's like the best part of that interview, right? And so, I'm not saying march your cat in front of the camera for the call, but what I am saying is that these human parts of who we are aren't distractions from these relationships. They are the relationships. This is a way that we know each other uniquely during COVID-19 that might carry forward after this.
To pass on one anecdote, I heard a client speak about the experience he's had with a very large national law firm, and he's used to working with their San Francisco office, and he commented, he's a venture capitalist, commented he's getting more responsiveness and better service from his lawyers in the COVID-19 pandemic, loves connecting with them personally and getting on a Zoom call with them in their homes, and wants them to continue that way on the other side of the pandemic, with the caveat that he also wants them to walk away from their $1 million a year downtown San Francisco lease, because he doesn't need all the pomp and circumstance of that office to feel good about the legal services he's receiving. And I think that's reflective of a broader trend that I think most lawyers would be well served to recognize, is ultimately this is an individual and very human relationship that you're building with a client.
Yeah. Well, maybe to close on that, I definitely think that we are taking a different look at the way we work, macro and micro. So the profession is certainly, our team at Fastcase is, but I'll just say I miss being in the office with our team. It's a great, smart, fun group of people, and I miss them. I miss the opportunity to visit with friends at conferences, and I do think that we're going to rethink some of those things going forward. It's going to be a difficult transition back, but I really do hope we get back. I hope that we will be able to, meet in person, go running together, and find good ways to connect in person again soon.
I agree, Ed, and a long time tradition you and I have shared is going for a morning run on the opening day of the Clio Cloud Conference before I get on stage and do my
Right.
opening keynote. And I certainly hope we'll be able to enjoy that in the not too distant future.
I am very much looking forward to it. It's not really the same over Zoom.
Not at all. Well, Ed, this has been a wonderful conversation. We just scratched the surface of so many things we could talk about, but I love it every chance I have to have a conversation with you, and we'll definitely need to pick this up in a part 2. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Bolin, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.